Hello and welcome to Edukemy's YouTube channel. My name is Harsh Singh and in this video we shall discuss the feature news for today, 31st of January 2022. Today's feature news is on Ukraine and Russia crisis. In this context, we will understand what has been happening in and around Ukraine since the year 2014 and even before. What is the claim that Russia has over an integrated Russia? So we will understand what has been the claim of Russia, what has been the issue with Ukraine, how did USA and NATO come into being in this picture, and European Union, what are the stakes for Germany, and what's about India and China, right? So a very important article from the perspective of international relations. It's very analogous to what happened in a country like Syria or Yemen. Similar khichdi right here as well, right? It's like a porridge. It's like a porridge. So before we get into this, let me quickly welcome all the people here in the discussion. People watching online, welcome to all of you. Hi Amlan, hi Kriti, good evening Netra, Bhavani, Pratishtha, welcome to you. Hi Ashish, Hima, Ravi, welcome. Hi Sam, Tiyasha, welcome, and welcome to all the other people as well who are joining a little late or watching offline. Good evening to all of you. Now, the issue of crisis of Ukraine and Russia is not new. It is a very old issue. In the modern times, if you look at what happened was disintegration of USSR in the year 1991, and this led to formation of many territories, many smaller countries. One of them was Ukraine. And while the Cold War era was at its peak, we had two forces. One was the NATO forces, and it was formed in the year 1949. And we did have one force which was in opposition to this. Can you name this? USSR-led forces. What is the name of these forces? So they were in conflict with each other. So spies, Cold Wars, right? Heightened tensions at various other junctions, right? In South America, in Europe, they were the ones which were predominant, right? Anybody here? What is the name? Warsaw Pact. But after the disintegration of USSR, there was also a disintegration of Warsaw Pact. So all the countries erstwhile which were associated with a country like USSR, they all absorbed from Warsaw Pact, and this led to overpowering of NATO. What led to this? What led in future was the increased presence of NATO in the European Union region and the Europe region overall, right? When you see this map, the areas marked in dark blue, those countries were members of NATO before 1997, and rest of the countries became the members of NATO after 1997. See, earlier the war was ideological, right? Earlier, leftist versus rightist, right? That means capitalist versus communist. This was the form of economy previously. When USSR disintegrated, it understood that we need to adopt capitalism. Ways in production means have to be privatized. It was fine. But still, the differences existed in the form of strategy, spelling correct, and then the market, and then their domination, their influence, right? This was the area of concern for both the countries. While USA's continued to expand through its NATO-led forces into those territories which were uncharted for USA, the influence of Russia decreased. Now, this was the wall. This was the wall of protection for Russia. What we call as the Afghanistan region for India, the area which is like a barrier, a protection to ourselves, right? Similarly, Tibet was another region between India and China. Tibet was the area which was the front for India and China, and now that front has been captured by China. Similarly, when India and Pakistan were united, the front was Afghanistan. Now, when Pakistan became a different country, this front was completely left open. Similarly, Russia has been concerned with this fact that its front, its cushion, it has been all taken over by NATO forces, right? Some of the countries are associates of Russia. One of the favorites is Belarus. However, Ukraine is one country which has not been in Russia's side. So let us quickly understand what has happened in Ukraine. In the year 2014, there was a mass movement here at Maidan protest, right? So they happened in Kiev in Ukraine, and this protest happened because the president of Ukraine that time, 2014, 2009, 10 to 14, Mr. Viktor Yanukovych, he was a pro-Russian. Now see, Ukraine primarily earlier, the area territories were almost similar, and the kind of people who lived in USSR, they had similar ethnicity, similar culture, similar backgrounds. So how Russians would call it is that the great tripartite. Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia all had similar interests, similar kind of people, similar culture. This is what the president of Russia, as of now, also claims. And they have got very good relations with Belarus. In fact, right now, there are forces, aeroplanes of fighter planes of Russia have already landed at Belarus. Now, Belarus is one country from where Russia is trying to occupy the borders along Ukraine. And if you have heard of Chernobyl, this is one place very close to the border along Belarus. This is one. From east and from south, if you see, look at the east, this was the prime contention during 2014. People in eastern and southern areas, they said, we don't want to be a part of Ukraine. We want to be an independent territory, which is also overseen by Russia. So many people here, backed by Russia, they revolted, they protested, they had arms, and they largely this was not under control of Ukraine. And Crimea was thus annexed also by Russia. This is 2014. Before this, around this time itself, what had happened was that the president Viktor Yanukovych, he was pro-Russian. So associations, increased associations, there could be monetary benefits, a lot of allegations. So he said that Ukraine would not enter into many pacts with European Union. In fact, it will enter into pacts with Russia. Now, for people who are based at Kiev or who are actually pro individual identity of Ukraine, they would always favor being a part of European Union, because more rights, more humanitarian things, rather than becoming a subsidiary to Russia. People would favor this. They started rebelling. Why did the president, Mr. Viktor, say that we would become a part of Russia instead of becoming a part of greater economic cooperation of Europe? So they started revolting, and this is what resulted into many protests in Ukraine. This led to ousting of the president also. He ran away to Russia, and after that Ukraine became more oriented towards Europe, right? And before that, Ukraine had also said in 2008 that they would probably join NATO forces, and NATO was also very happy to accept them. This had already troubled Russia all the time, which said, according to the great tripartite, just like China has its own policy, Arunachal was ours, and Tibet was ours, and Nepal was ours, and Kashmir region was ours. Similarly, Russia also has a policy. It said that people of Belarus and people of Ukraine, people of Russia, they were the same people. They were the same people of different kinds. So this culture is ours, and we will also ensure that we integrate the whole culture in the 21st century. This is what Russia had claimed. But association of Ukraine with the European Union, this troubled Russia right from the those times when Ukraine declared to be a part of NATO. And therefore, whenever the time was opportune, whenever it was a good time for Russia, they annexed Crimea. And slowly and steadily, they have influence over East as well. And now through North, they are trying to intrude. Now, there were agreements in 2014 which were conducted in Belarus, Minsk Accords 1, Minsk Accords 2. Both of them said that the countries will ensure that the armies, the military is back off, that there be peace, that there be no influence of the external forces, that there be peaceful resolution of settlement between both the countries. This is what was said. But lately, escalations of the conflict have happened. How? There have been almost 1 lakh forces which have lined up along the border. And there is also a tension between countries saying that possibly Russia will try to attack Ukraine. On the other hand, Ukraine is getting some backing of NATO, getting a good backing of USA also. Why so? Why do they want to back this country? Because it's not happening in their terrain. No, it's happening in another country. This is the, as I mentioned, this is the barrier between both of them, right? Both of them want to have the barrier in favor of them, right? The cushion, the barrier. Can you give me a better term for this? Is there a keyword for this? Right? The frontier area. This is the reason because of which both the countries are at conflict, Russia and Ukraine. But Russia is not dealing with Ukraine directly. It is in talks with USA. Why so? Because USA has ensured through its technological development, geopolitics, that it provides Ukraine with weaponry. So Ukraine has weaponry from Turkey, which is a NATO member, drones. Ukraine has got anti-tank missiles gifted by who? Mr. USA. Now these are the irritants, right? Over that, if USA supplies its not nuclear but strategic weapons to this area, it again leads to more trouble for Russia, because USA is also an advanced nation, so is Russia. There will be more nuclearization of the space, there will be more conflicts in the region. This will lead to further instability. This is the reason that Russia says that we will stop all this military development along the border, provided you start to withdraw. NATO starts to withdraw. Now, not only from Ukraine, right? They have to promise, NATO has to promise that they will never ensure that Ukraine is a member of NATO. This is one. There are other countries also in the east, like Georgia, etc. They also, are supposed to become members of NATO. Russia has clearly said, no, you will not. These countries will not be made members of NATO. In fact, they said that pre-1991, whoever your members were, have them as members, and other countries, they must not be made members, right? So this is another demand. And the third demand from Russia is that the missile system, weaponry system which have been given to these countries, they must be taken back, and nuclear missiles should not be, there must be denuclearization of this region. This is going to lead to more stability. On the other hand, USA is not ready to accept these terms. Although USA has provided this force backing to NATO, although USA is the one which has provided weaponry to Ukraine, USA is the one which funds a lot of movements around this region, USA is not ready to accept all this. Why? Because it is not happening in their terrain. They can fund these things right now. And of course, if you people are scared of a war here, whatever I am reading is that war won't happen. They will escalate it to the highest levels, but war will not happen. The reason is that both the countries have to lose if a war happens, right? This is a strategic input that you can use everywhere to speak. War does not decide who wins. War decides that the warring parties, both of them lose. They will lose resources, they will lose money, they will lose influence, right? Their whole economy will come to a stop. These are the problems because of which these countries don't want to indulge in war, but they will escalate the war to the brim. Why? Because they want to seek a greater influence along this region. Russia has an influence of Belarus, and USA has a strong influence on Ukraine. This is how they are trying to counter each other. Now, the reason why Russia would not like to get into war is because Russia is looking forward to a better expansion, better growth. Russia has not had a stronger economy in the last 30 years. It wants to grow. It will not get into military conflicts directly. It will, if you remember, we had discussed why these countries are the military exporters, because they want the world to fight, but they themselves don't want to fight. On the other hand, USA, why does it not want to fight? Because it has a bigger problem with China. This is the reason that it removed its forces from Afghanistan. Why would it want to put back its forces along the Belarus border? And this is the reason that NATO forces have been mobilized, a part of which is USA, not USA's armed forces or Marines, right? So USA also doesn't want to war, but they want to bring this to the brink of war, so that the person who is able to sustain more gets the final edge. Both the countries are not ready to accept the situation here, and this is the reason that is leading to escalation at Ukraine border. What is for India here? See, another thing here of Germany, economy which is prosperous, right? We are speaking of a country like Germany here, one of the largest economies in this area. Now, Germany has good relations with Russia, right? If you remember, we did speak of, all right, this is France, this is Germany. That's what I thought, right? So Portugal, Spain, France, and Germany, right? So when we speak of a country like Germany, the Nord pipelines were established here, but USA says that we will ensure that no sanction by Germany is given to the Nord pipelines in case Russia doesn't back off of Ukraine. Imagine that. This is the kind of influence USA has on other countries, and this is the reason that Germany keeps quiet when we speak of, you remember what did the naval chief of Germany did? He by mistake spoke something, his own views, but standard views about Russia, and because of this he had to resign, right? So point being that Germany is itself not provided its weaponry to Ukraine. It has not provided a lot of resources or spoken diplomatically in favor of Ukraine. On the other hand, Germany has good influence with Russia. On the other hand, USA is not saying not pipeline will not happen, two will not happen in case Russia attacks Ukraine. Now, Germany would have financed Russia, no, in that case. Lot of gas pipelines, they are spread across Europe through Russia. 1/3 of the gas supplies to Europe happens through Russia. So this is the advantage of Russia here in participation with Europe. It doesn't have an issue. On the other hand, there's another stakeholdership of USA and European Union. European Union is trying to integrate itself, and it does not want USA to meddle with its internal affairs. When we speak of Belarus, when we speak of Ukraine, these are countries participating in Europe. Even Russia is part of Europe, right? In both the continents, but it's largely Moscow is a part of Europe. So why should USA intervene here? Europe also has this question over USA. So it is a smaller player. The economy of Russia is also small, but then the kind of influence it wants over these terrains is humongous, and this is the reason that this conflict is there. Also, what is in stake for a country like India and China? See, in case rockets are flown, in case bullets are bursted, and then there is war between the nations, or something drastic happens, Russia will seek aid with China, because China is a bigger power. China also is not in favor of countries in European Union. China is also not in favor of countries like USA. Strategically, although we know that China's maximum trade happens with European Union, right, along with ASEAN and USA, but still it will always favor Russia. It will provide weaponry, it will provide arms, all the kind of support. And this is not good for India. Why? Because in this way, these countries will gain prominence. India has good supplies of defense from Russia. 60% of supplies of defense still happens from a country like Russia, a time-tested friend. Till now, India had not released any stand, but just yesterday, they released a stand saying that this is a situation of concern, and they are monitoring the situation closely. So India cannot lose a Russian ally, because if it loses a Russian ally, it speaks in front of European Union in favor of USA. Russia will lose friendship with India, and in this context, Russia will gain more prominence with China, and then this is not good for India. On the other hand, India also doesn't want to lose good touch with a country like USA, because better trade relations, better human to human connect, and diversification of a lot of things from Russia towards USA, right? So this is the complete understanding of the geopolitics of these areas, right? Earlier, as I mentioned, that these regions were all the same: Russia, Belarus, Ukraine. This was all the same, right? And the president of Russia, they have repeatedly mentioned time and again that this was one of the greatest disasters of the 20th century, the disintegration of USSR. So they want to make the Russia, or the erstwhile USSR, back again, especially in the context of the culture. So they have said Russians and Ukrainians were one people who shared single historic and spiritual spaces, right? In fact, it was also said that Russians, and then we have the small Russians, and then the white Russians. People in Belarus would be called as white Russians, Ukraine as small Russians, and then Russians. All of them together with each other, right? So this is how it has been called as historically. People have associations, but Ukraine also got its freedom during those times, right? 20th century. So this is what happened during the 20th century, because of which Ukraine became an independent nation. And expansion of NATO irked Russia, and this is why the conflict is there. And then towards the end of this article, we also explain the kind of interest India has with Russia. 60% of imports. Not only that, we also have various agreements with Russia. For example, Arctic agreement, remember that, right? Chennai, Vladivostok, all that, that. We also know certain more important aspects which relate to India. For example, Make in India, right? Russia is the one which has been helping India a lot. So in this context, we cannot lose Russia as an ally. Let us see what happens. As I mentioned previously, it is only going to get escalated, but not result in an actual war, because both the countries are bound to lose here, right? Nobody wins in a war. Remember, and this is the reason that many a times when India went into the brink of having a war with Pakistan, India did not actually have a war with Pakistan. It was only at the brink of it. 2001 parliament attack, 2004, 5, again the same thing happened, right? So that's it. So when we speak of Ukraine and Russia crisis, we spoke of what is the present context of this crisis, right? So it started in the year 2014, annexation of Crimea, part of Ukraine. And then before this, Mr. Viktor Yanukovych, and then post this, Russia's acceleration of relationship with European Union and NATO. This is one thing, one context, the present and the immediate past. We also understood how Russia views countries like Ukraine and Belarus. It looks at it as extended neighborhood, right? This is a good word to use, extended neighborhood, right? And buffer zone, absolutely, thank you, very smart. Kriti, Amlan, Hima, I appreciate these keywords that you used, right? So this is what we understood about the kind of relationship that Russia looks at when it looks at Belarus and Ukraine. So Belarus is another country which is very much a friend of Russia, Russia is using its land to be able to occupy Ukraine from the north. So how Russia looks, how Ukraine looks at this issue is that it does not want to become associated with Russia, but Ukraine looks forward to independence, its own autonomy. But Russia does not want Ukraine to participate with NATO, with European Union. This is another conflict for Ukraine. On the other hand, Ukraine is one of the largest countries in European Union region, right? If you look at the map, Ukraine would supply food products to European Union. On the other hand, Russia also resources are not less. The oil supply, energy supply, a lot of things happen from Russia to Europe. So there are stakeholders. What is the stakeholdership of USA? We understood, right? So USA and Germany. And what about China and India? We understood each of them in individuality. And primarily a question, if it has to come, it will come from India's perspective. Even if it comes from the perspective of only Ukraine and Russia, we will have to put India's stakeholdership towards the end, right? Last paragraph, and a part of answer, 30% of answer could be on India's participation as well, right? So India, strategic autonomy, something that suits us right now. Peace suits us, and peace between both the nations suits us because both are our allies. This is the conclusion to a question like this. Question is, discuss the reasons for current crisis between Russia and Ukraine. How will India be affected by this crisis? The reasons for this crisis. One is how Russia's history and what is its perspective towards Ukraine, present perspective towards Ukraine. Influence of the outsiders, this is another keyword here, right? Economy, security means weapon systems, etc. So these are the kind of reasons that you could add. 5-6 reasons with examples. Your half part of the answer is already done. How will India be affected by this crisis? You speak about India, Russia, USA and China here, and your answer will be complete, right? So let me look at some questions if you have any. All right. So Amlan, I answered your question about ceasefire. They are escalating tensions. All right, Warsaw Pact, Ashish, Netra, absolutely correct. Yes, also Amlan, absolutely correct. After 2014, Russia was asked to suspend its membership of G8 countries. Earlier, there was G7, and then Russia was added to it to become G8 along with Russia. And after 2014, Russia was asked to take voluntary, ejection from this. And from G8 membership, it became G7 again, right? Group of 7 countries. And after that, Russia said, I will not become a part of G7, G8, and it voluntarily came out of this union in 2017. All right, Pooja, absolutely correct. The whole Cuban Missile Crisis happened just because USSR gained influence in US backyard, but they do not the same to other countries. Absolutely. Absolutely, Hima, you are absolutely correct. And this kind of crisis has not just happened here. If you look at the history of Afghanistan, Same thing happened here. If you look at the history of Central Asian republics, same thing happened. Vietnam, Korea, right? Cuban Missile Crisis, right? And this is how you compare, this is how we compare, if we know things in perspective, non-aligned countries. And if you remember, I had mentioned about Katanga province in Africa, right? In one of the major countries in Africa, in one of the Central African countries, that was one of the important countries in Africa, right? So all these places, one of the sides which were funded was through USA, the other side was funded through Russia or USSR, and then the conflict was there at another place, right? So this time in Europe's backyard and directly with Russia, and this is possibly the reason that Russia will not get into direct conflicts, so will USA not get into conflicts, right? So good analysis that you have presented, but in the larger picture, this is how the geopolitics happens. Arushi says, good evening, sir. Sorry to join late, but I too am getting into the habit of coming live from now. Yes, Arushi, please join us. Please keep joining us. And we start with a question, and later on we go ahead with the current affairs discussion. Keep posing questions. Opinions are welcome. Welcome, Arushi. Varun, welcome. Welcome today. Do American civil servants also study IR of India like us, sir? American civil servants do study, but you know the kind of diplomacy that America follows. India has hardly got 600 to 800 IFS foreign services officers, and America's contingent of foreign services officers and Chinese civil servants, foreign services officers, is more than 10 times of this. How do we compensate for these foreign services officers? We send IS officers abroad, we send revenue services officers abroad, right? Various other politicians and diplomats abroad, but foreign services is not there. So, the kind of study that we do for others is so that we can gain at least, head to head a level which is comparable to them. But they would study a country like Russia more, they would study a country in Europe far more, or Central America, the Latin America far more than they would study India, right? But they would study India, of course. Even allies like France, allies like Germany, they would study India. So we have spies, a network of spies throughout the whole world. But yes, not as much as we would want to know them. Ravi, US and Russia, the greed for power and dominance, the problem creators. But then see, Ravi, I acknowledge your inputs here. However, I would say that the words that we will use is not this in answer writing, is not this at all. What we become is what we consume. So you will start using the words, for example, strategic dominance, right? Divergence of interest, multipolarity of the world, hegemony. These are the keywords that you will use, Ravi, right? Instead of this, I understand the thoughts and opinion. The bill se samajh raha hu aapki baat, but then I would not want you to use these words, right? The person who uses those refined terms, they will gain that edge, right? So through this, we come to the conclusion of this conversation. You like this video so that we understand your appreciation towards this. We will meet you tomorrow for the current affairs, and after that the feature news, right? Also, very important thing, we also had the release of the economic survey today. Economic survey, right? It came, Miss Sitaraman, she was in the session, and she declared this document. This is a very, very amazing, beautiful document, 400 plus pages, but we will simplify it for you and present what has been the survey of the whole economy in the past year. Tomorrow the budget will be presented. We will also have a series of articles on economic survey and budget. They will help you in understanding GS paper 2, GS paper 3 in totality. So you worry not about how many pages it is. We will simplify it for you, and we will start using these documents and the kind of inputs that they give to be able to write good answers. All right. So Arushi says, a lot of critics, including internationally acclaimed reporters, have blamed US, Russia of having somewhat background nexus to promote arms race to make economic gains by triggering. Yes, Arushi, we have discussed this. We have discussed this in one of the feature news just 4 days back. It was on nuclear arm race, right? We discussed this, whatever you mentioned. Absolutely correct. Netra, Kanupriya, Arushi, Netra, all of you, thank you very much. See you tomorrow. All right, Kriti, I didn't get your question. Please post it again. Meanwhile, you like this initiative, share some love. Thank you and good night.